And welcome back to the Hot Lap. Yes, we've got a few talking points. So coming up in today's show, we've got Verstappen. Is he going to win that championship? Probably in Qatar. We'll get into that in a minute. But can McLaren spring a surprise? And also that Mercedes versus Ferrari battle. It's getting a bit too close if you're a Mercedes fan. Also, Russell opens up about the Hamilton and Wolf relationship. And Ricciardo, believe it or not, thanking McLaren for firing him. That's a strange one. But let's get into our first story about Max Verstappen. Only an absolute disaster or a miracle, depending what side of the Verstappen fence you sit on, is going to stop this man becoming a 3 times champion. Now, from the Evening Standard website, we're looking at how Max Verstappen can become champion for a third year in a row. And he might not even do it in an actual Grand Prix. He could be doing it in the sprint race. And the article goes on to say that a near flawless season for the Red Bull racer has put him on 400 points. And that's almost double the amount of his nearest rival. And there's still 6 rounds to go. So his lead is such over his teammate Sergio Perez, who is the only one that can stop him. He could even secure a third successive crown, as we mentioned, before the Grand Prix. And as we know, on Saturday, if you didn't, it is sprint race. It is a sprint race weekend. And the premonitions show that Verstappen could win the title in the sprint race. But how, I hear you ask? Well, if he finishes 6th or higher in the sprint, in this scenario, Verstappen claims the title no matter where Perez finishes. If he finishes 7th, Perez must win the sprint to deny Verstappen, at which point he can still easily win the title the next day. Now, if he finishes 8th in the sprint, this will still be enough if Perez finishes outside the top 2. If he misses out on any points in the sprint, Verstappen will still win the World Championship if Sergio finishes outside the top 3. Now, if he misses out and Perez finishes inside the top 3, all will not be lost. As Verstappen, as we know, he's got that massive lead. He needs to come out of the weekend with a 146-point lead to win the title after Sunday's Grand Prix. Now, his current advantage is 177. So, as you know, it's going to need to be an absolute disaster for Verstappen not to win. I tell you what, that would make for an incredible Drive to Survive season, wouldn't it? If Perez ended up becoming champion. But with the way Perez is driving, I'm unfortunately, as much as I like the guy, he almost needs a transcendent change, doesn't he? But there we go. It could happen. You never know. But the other storyline going into Qatar is the wonderful liveried McLaren. I mean, and it goes. This is from planetf1.com, and it's asking whether McLaren could spring basically a surprise. And as we know, it's the MotoGP venue is basically Qatar. Qatar is known as a MotoGP venue first, and kind of like a Formula One venue second. Yeah, we visited there in 2021, and it's hoping to raise its reputation as one of F1's toughest challenges. And it's had it's basically had new gravel. It should be a lot smoother than it was, less bumps, and the latest generations of this Formula One cars have not raced there yet. Because if you remember, it was the 2021 cars that has. But have the circuits changed? Well, the COVID pandemic, as we know, was still affecting everything in 2021, which is why Qatar was a late slot on the calendar. But it's now got this 10-year contract. So, what are the characteristics for the circuit? Well, it's as we know, it's got 16 turns, it's 5.4 kilometres, and it's really smooth, sweeping configuration, and it's medium to high-speed corners that it's going to require constant steering input from the drivers, and, well, constant. And that 57-lap race is going to have higher than average speeds of the season. In 2021, Hamilton's pole was just about in the 120s. However, it's one of the world's newest racing circuits, and the runoff zones are generous. Although we did speak about those interesting configurations or updates, let's say, with the concrete blocks yesterday. If you want to go into it for track limits, but how is McLaren going to fare? Basically, McLaren's reinvigorated MCL60. As we know, it's shone at Suzuka. It's shone at Silverstone. It also shone at Singapore, but they conceded that they felt the car was lacking in the lower speed corners compared to Red Bull at Suzuka. Having said that, there are fewer of those lower speed corners at the Lusail International Circuit, aka Qatar, and they're talking they maybe fancy their chances of getting a bit closer, at least, to the runaway leaders. Now, when I say closer, I don't think, and I don't think anyone thinks, that McLaren are going to absolutely outright beat Red Bull on pace. However, Red Bull have been very lucky this season. A shy pit stop, a qualifying nightmare, a puncture, a broken front wing, a blippy gearbox, a damaged engine, anything. I think McLaren is fast enough to potentially win, as we saw. I mean, they weren't a million miles away in Japan, and Japan suited, I think, the Red Bull more than it suited the McLaren. Obviously, expect Red Bull to have an advantage in Qatar. But I think any blip that Red Bull have, I think McLaren could potentially pounce. Any mistake they make, or a safety car goes the wrong way. People are suggesting that McLaren may have enough to win the race if Red Bull do not have, I don't want to say a perfect weekend, but a really solid weekend. But I think it means it needs McLaren to have an absolutely perfect weekend, which I really, really hope they have. But who knows? I mean, I would love for McLaren to win. Imagine that Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri first victory. I think you've got to go with Norris. As good as Piastri is, as good as he was in Japan, Norris is still the leader in that team, and he's still, I think, overall the fastest driver. But our third story is that Ferrari versus Mercedes battle. And I mean, what's interesting is that, I mean, you just look at the points. There's 20 points in it. And that's nothing. I mean, with obviously George Russell having that mistake, let's say, in Japan, in Singapore, that did cost them, didn't it? And Ferrari are very much looking like the faster team. How much faster? Well, if we look at the upcoming races in a bit, they are a lot faster. And as we as we were speaking in the story the other day, it would appear that Mercedes have lost their race day edge. They've lost their their tyres degrading less than the Ferrari team. And I think that's going to be really, 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 really important. And in qualifying, it seems that Ferrari have the pace on Mercedes. But do they have enough to close that 20-point gap? Well, if we have a look at the upcoming races here, we have obviously got Qatar, where we think that Ferrari are going to be stronger. Then we've got United States, which is kind of like a real big mixture of corners. I think that's going to be really close. We've got Mexico with the long straights. However, it's the engines do funny things there because it's quite an high altitude with the turbos, and I think Mercedes do have a better chance there, and I think Mercedes will be close, really close to Ferrari. In Brazil, I even think, yes, you've got that long straight, but that you've got that mid-sec, of slowish speed corners in the middle. I think Mercedes could be fighting there. The Las Vegas is going to be an absolute outlier. I have no idea who's going to be faster there. And I think Abu Dhabi, I think Mercedes have got a decent chance there. But I do feel that United States, possibly Mexico, and obviously Qatar, I do think at least 3 out of the last 3 races, Ferrari are going to have an obvious advantage. So I guess it's gonna kind of like be a wait and see in terms of who's going to be better. But I do feel that Ferrari on the up. They are the ones that do have to score more points than Mercedes. Will that mean Ferrari end up doing silly strategies to try and beat Mercedes? I hope not. I hope we get I hope we're not slapping our heads like we were last year with some of the craziness that they especially gave to Leclerc. But it's going to be really interesting. And now pretty much both title fights are over. Who's going to finish second in the constructors is going to be one of the most interesting things, as well as maybe Hamilton beating Perez. But I think that's less likely if Perez can get his stuff together. So, and speaking of Mercedes, we've got this News report on GP fans. Russell reveals F1 boss lets megastar Hamilton get away with things. So, I mean, poor Russell, he's getting it in the neck, isn't it, at the moment by some people. This is by Tyler Foster, and it goes on to say that Mercedes Formula One driver Russell, he's explained that his relationship with Toto WOLF, it's different to that of teammate Lewis. That's kind of understandable because, as we know, Lewis joined the team in 2013. It almost feels a bit like the David Coulthard, Mika Hakkinen relationship, where Hakkinen was a lot closer to Ron Dennis because obviously Hakkinen joined the team in '93, and then he was that almost near-death experience in '95 and came back, which a lot of people said brought Dennis and Hakkinen quite close. But moving on, he said it's been a decade since Hamilton shocked the F1 world by leaving McLaren and going to Mercedes, and it's led to the most dominant periods in Formula One. Now, in the 10 years since that signing, we've got Hamilton and his boss. Their relationship has blossomed. However, it says his current Mercedes teammate Russell has given an interesting insight to the reasoning behind possible differences in their relationship with the team principal. And now, speaking to Tom Clarkson on the F1 Beyond the Grid podcast, Russell compared the two and highlighted that Hamilton's star magnetism is a key factor in that respect that Mercedes and Wolff show towards him. He said, "I'm not too sure, to be honest. I think obviously when Lewis and Toto were acquainted, Lewis was already a world champion, already this megastar," he said. "There was perhaps more respect from Toto to Lewis because, of course, Lewis joined Mercedes. Toto was completely new to Formula One at the time. Toto was the rookie and Lewis was the household massive name. Whereas with myself, Toto signed me as a 16-year-old. They've always, I guess, nurtured me along the way, advised me, and helped me reach my full potential. He's my boss, but he's also my friend." In terms of extracurricular activities, it seems that Russell is not just following Hamilton's footstep on track, but off it as well. And he's admitted that his newfound residence in Monaco allows him to spend leisure time with his boss. However, Russell shared that he is treated slightly differently compared to Lewis, especially since taking up some adventurous activities. He said, "We live probably 200 metres away from each other," said the Brit. We go to the gym together, get coffee together daily. We don't really talk about racing, to be honest. We're learning to free dive together at the moment. And I was talking with Toto before the break and saying, I want to try this and that. Toto is one that does a lot of activities, but he sort of lets Lewis get away with it. When it comes to me, he's like, you've got to be careful of this. And he's totally right. But I had this mentality that I can't wrap myself in bubble wrap. I know my boundaries, I know my limits. I get my exhilaration from the racetrack. So any additional sport I do, I'm going to do at my level. But I'm not going to push the boundaries of whatever it is and risk an injury. And Russell, as it says here, Russell will be focused on the Qatar this Sunday, where he looks to impress his team boss by bridging that 115-point gap to Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. As you know, George Russell beat Hamilton last year. And he's had slightly less luck, I think, in terms of reliability. And I think the odd safety car, where Lewis was quite unlucky last year, I think there have been times where the safety car's gone Lewis's way this year, as opposed to George's. But I do feel that George needs a solid weekend. He got a lot of criticism, some of it unfair, I think, in Japan. But it would be good if both Mercedes boys have a good showing. A lot of people have suggested that even Ferrari might be out of reach at Qatar. Maybe in qualifying, but if Mercedes can challenge them again in the race, that would be fantastic. And this is a high degradation circuit, just like Japan. But it's going to be interesting. Those practice runs in the first hour in free practice one is going to be so important to get that setup right for all the teams. And I think if they don't, that's kind of going to cause them issues for the rest of the weekend, because that's it. That's your practice session. Then we go into qualifying, and then the next session after that is the Saturday sprint qualifying, and then the sprint race, and then we go into Sunday in the race. And that has also, funnily enough, hurt Red Bull in the past, particularly in Brazil last year. So it's gonna be an interesting weekend with lots of action. Stay with us at the Hot Lap. We will be there. We'll be giving obviously our opinions, etc. Should you want to listen to them. Once again, thank you so much for liking, subscribing. We've got a few more subscribers. We've got people in the comments. I try and reply, and I will reply to every comment at some point. As I mentioned, sometimes I'm a tiny bit busy, but I will get to them. and it means so much. Even a comment, a like, a subscribe means absolutely so much to me. It's been giving me loads of smiles. Thank you very much. It makes it kind of like worth doing, sitting at my computer in the evening. It's now what, 1 minute to 9, and I really enjoy doing this. I pretty much record it live, so that's why you hear the ums and the ahs. It's not 100% rehearsed, let's say, because I want to get my feeling. I want to get most of my feelings across. But I'm excited for the Qatar Grand Prix. And if you made it to the end, if you're listening to this, you are indeed an F1 champion. But just by watching it yourself, full respect. Thank you very much. Speak to you next time.